going to record this session and we will put it, we'll make that available on our FTP server. If you would like to go back and look at any of this again, you can certainly do that. And we will start with some experts from the DNR. We'll start with Brian Schwingle. Brian works in the forestry division at the DNR and is a forest health specialist. And then we have Kenny Blumenfeld with us. Kenny is a climatologist with our state climatology office, and he can share some information about our climate in Minnesota in the fall and what aspects of that are changing or not changing. And then finally, I'll wrap up with some information about how to follow along with the fall colors this season, and some tips on how to get out and enjoy the fall colors. And then we'll finish up with a Q&A session. So again, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to begin recording here. And first, I will kick it to Brian, our forest health expert, to tell us about what to expect and what to look for this fall.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sarah. So I'll just get into it and tell you kind of everything I know. Fall color development in deciduous trees, it really is all about an unmasking of pigments that are already there. So as day length decreases, deciduous trees stop making chlorophyll, which is the green pigment crucial for photosynthesis. And as the tree stops making that chlorophyll, pigments within the leaf that are already there, like yellows, oranges, and brown pigments, they're unmasked. They've always been there. It's just that there's so much green chlorophyll that it covers them up during the spring and summer. The timing of fall color is primarily driven by day length and then by genetics. So, for example, different tree species will change colors at slightly different time. Like our maples typically change color before our tamaracks, and that's genetically driven. But again, day length is the main variable that affects when deciduous trees change color. Unlike the yellows and the browns and the oranges, red colors, red, pink, purple, those come from a different set of pigments. They're called anthocyanins, and they're produced in some, not all, but some tree species in late summer and fall, especially when days are warm and sunny and nights are cool, but not freezing. So the weather and a tree's crown exposure to the sun really affect how much red is made. So that can change quite a bit from year to year, depending on the weather. But again, day length, it's the main variable driving fall leaf color timing. So it's not going to vary by much every year. Weather factors like wind, overcast, rainy days, drought, freezing temperatures, warmer than normal temperatures, they all affect the brilliance and the duration of fall colors. They also can subtly shift the start of fall color timing by about a couple weeks. The weather factor, I'd say that the biggest weather factor that no one wants in the upper Midwest is a really hard early freeze. That can halt the physiological fall color process in its tracks, and it can make green leaves just drop off trees like crazy. So we don't want an early hard freeze. Other weather factors, they have a more subtle impact. So for example, cooler than normal September weather, but not freezing, that can kick off fall colors early. So as an example, northern Minnesota, it experienced a very light frost in early September 2020. It didn't ruin fall colors, but near peak fall colors happened about 2 weeks after that fall frost across like the northern third of Minnesota. And that was in recent years, that was the earliest fall colors we had. Spring and summer drought and warmer than normal September weather, they can delay the start of fall color. Warmer than normal September, high winds, extended rainy weather, extreme drought, they can diminish the brilliance of fall colors. Kind of a separate but related topic is anything that can damage trees or branches in the spring and summer. You can see like entire trees change colors, fall colors, or individual branches very early, like even around July 4th. I see this every year in a very scattered way. The things that can do that, it's like anything that damages branches. So for example, squirrel feeding on sugar maples in March can cause fall colors on those damaged branches in July. But overall, those kinds of things are really scattered across the landscape and they don't represent the bulk of fall color change. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, what about this year's drought? What's that going to do to the fall colors? The good news, I guess, is that we haven't seen any obvious effect on our fall colors in recent years. We've had some drought. Kenny could talk all about this in recent years, but there isn't an obvious correlation. Maybe the brilliance of fall colors diminished across the landscape, but not at a level that most people would notice. So with that, I'll hand things over to Kenny Blumenfeld, senior climatologist.
Thank you, Brian, and hello, everybody. I'll just talk briefly about kind of the current climate, and then I will sort of back that into larger trends, and then we'll kind of hand it off from there. So obviously, as a lot of you saw today, Minnesota's drought has progressed to the exceptional level, which is the highest level of drought on the U.S. Drought Monitor in two parts of the state, in far southern Minnesota, kind of near the Iowa border, and then in the area west of Duluth. Those are small areas, but then they're surrounded by larger areas of extreme drought, mostly again in eastern Minnesota, and then that's surrounded by what's called severe drought, and then there's moderate drought, and smaller and smaller parts of the state are experiencing no drought currently. So this has been the big story. We're really in the fourth straight year of very dry conditions during the growing season, and the third straight year where those dry growing season conditions have led to actual significant drought categories. Each of the last 3 years has had at least extreme drought in Minnesota, and now 2 of those years, 2021 and this year, have reached the exceptional category. As Brian was mentioning, a lot depends on what happens in September, and we can talk a little bit about September's climate. It's an interesting month. It obviously starts out with summer-like conditions many years, although this year's summer-like heat wave was a little bit unusual. It was high end on the heat wave scale. It's not unusual to have summer-like intense heat at the beginning of September. It is unusual to have that same type of heat at the end of the month, and it's fairly rare that you'd even have 90-degree days after the autumn equinox. Usually, the last week or so of September, it's hard to even find temperatures in the lower mid 80s anywhere. It does happen, but it's not that common. So you get a big change as you're moving through fall. And fall, you have to remember, it's a transition season. It's really the transition between summer and winter, and so the beginning of autumn, which climatologically we just think of that as September in general, is a lot more like summer, and the end of autumn is generally a lot more like winter. So for example, right now, places in Minnesota have almost 12 or over 12, almost 13 hours of daylight. That would be fairly intense daylight too. It's similar to what you get in early April. By the end of fall, you've lost 3 hours of daylight, and so you're down to maybe 9 hours or so on average, and it's at a much weaker sun angle, so the sunlight is less direct. And so those are the conditions that generally, drive the weather that we experience, which then we can summarize as the climate of our autumn. Fall is a fairly rapidly changing season, not just the season itself, but over time we've seen big changes in fall as our climate in Minnesota has changed. September is rapidly warming. On average, September's have been warming. That's basically the third fastest month for warming in Minnesota. October is a little bit of a break from that, but then November is also warming pretty quickly too. So it's hard to say where we're all going with some of this, because as Brian noted, day length isn't going to change. That's not something that's affected by changing climate conditions, because that's governed by these relatively or extremely stable relationships between the Earth and the Sun. However, as insofar as temperature does drive any of the fall color sensation, well, there are some changes that have been underway with warming in September, later arriving heat waves coming kind of, not every year, but a tendency to have them showing up later in the month than they used to and creeping into October at times. And we've even had really warm November conditions, although at that time fall colors kind of over and done with. But so those are, looking forward, we do expect the growing season to kind of continue expanding across the calendar. This is going to go in fits and starts. You're going to have years where fall arrives just on time, or you're going to have years where fall arrives early, or winter seems to arrive early. But on average, we're seeing a lengthening of the growing season over the last century plus. A typical place in Minnesota has added about 2 to 3 weeks to its growing season, meaning the conditions where temperatures are entirely above freezing. And we're seeing this with other metrics too, where the length of the, say, 70-degree high temperature season is tending to expand in a similar way. And so you would expect that as much as temperature is a driver of this, there might be some changes because of increasing September warmth and increasing September and fall heat waves. And that's about all that I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny and Brian. I will wrap up here with some information about how folks can follow the fall colors. And one great spot to check out is the Fall Color Finder on the DNR website. That can be found at mndnr.gov/fall-color. And we have reporters across the state of Minnesota. They are staff at our state parks who report in weekly. And their reports usually come in on Wednesdays. Sometimes we have some of our reporters who make additional reports throughout the week, but most of the reports come in on Wednesdays. They make an estimate of the percentage of the leaves that have changed color in their area, as well as share some photos. So that is what drives our fall color map that you can find online. And those updates come in just in time for folks to check those out each week and make plans for their weekend outings to enjoy the fall colors. One of the cool aspects of the Fall Color Finder is the public can participate. We have a spot there where people can share their photos from their fall color adventures out on state lands. And those photos can be used in a variety of places, like our online photo galleries or our newsletters, our social media. So that's a fun way for the public to participate, and it's a way to crowdsource information about what is seen on the ground across the state. One additional great tool for people to use for trip planning is our Fall Color Update newsletter. You can sign up for this on the Fall Color website, and you can either get email or text updates. They come out on Thursdays at noon. So again, just in time to plan your weekend outings. And those newsletters feature things like suggested itineraries to go see the best of fall colors that week, or some hidden gems within the state park system. We also have some information about the plants and animals that folks might see if they're out visiting the places that we're showcasing. So those are two really great tools. And now a little bit of information on where to go to see fall colors. Really, as a DNR, we want to say, come explore outside in the fall. It is a great time to be outside. The temperatures are more comfortable. There's fewer mosquitoes. It's just a great time to be outside. Whether people are seasoned outdoors people or new to outdoor recreation, there are lots of different places to go and things to do. We have 75 state parks and recreation areas. We have 59 state forests. We have 27 state trails. That's 1,300 miles of trails people can explore. We have over 160 scientific and natural areas, really a lot of good places to get outside. And there's really something for everyone, from those folks who are really seeking a physical challenge and they want to go on a tough long hike or a mountain bike ride, or the people who'd like to relax in a hammock or have a family picnic. We have some really good naturalist events in our state parks that are a good way for people to learn a little bit more and learn about the nature that they're experiencing. So there are a lot of ways to enjoy state lands this fall. For people who'd like to stay overnight when they're out exploring fall colors, camping is available in most state parks, recreation areas, and state forests in the fall. Go to a park's website. The seasonal updates will list MEA weekend, which is the 19th through 22nd of October this year. But we also have state parks that are open for camping year round. So there's lots of opportunities to camp this fall. Fall weekends are busy and popular for camping in Minnesota. So if you'd like to stay in the state park or recreation area, you'll need a reservation. If you have some flexibility, we suggest try camping in a less busy park, maybe a more quieter spot. Or if you can camp during the week, you'll be more likely to find reservations. Another option, if you'd like to wait and see where the fall colors are at their best, try camping in one of our state forests. Those campsites are all available on a first come, first served basis. So it's a good spot to go camp if you'd like to decide last minute where you would like to go. So I think that wraps things up for me. We will move on to questions and answers. A few different ways to ask questions if you'd like. I see a few folks have raised their hand already. You can certainly do that. You can add a question into the chat if you prefer that, or you can just unmute and go ahead and ask your question. We'll start with Rose Schmidt. I see that you have your hand up.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for doing this briefing with us today. Just wanted to ask if one of you could talk just about kind of where fall colors are right now and when we may hit, if you can, I don't know if you can predict when we would hit peak season, but you know, especially in the Twin Cities metro area, kind of when we expect that, you know, people can kind of come out and enjoy the colors.
Well, I can take a stab at that. In the Twin Cities, if things go as they have in recent years, I'd say mid-October for kind of peak. That's on the later side of the range when we typically see peak colors. But again, as Kenny mentioned, our Septembers are getting warmer. We're getting fewer cool nights. than normal, what was historically normal, and that will delay the onset of the bulk of fall color change.
Thanks,
sorry
Brian.
sorry if I didn't answer all. I'm really bad with multi-part questions. I don't know how politicians do it in debates.
Chloe Johnson, you've got your hand up as well.
Hey, this is a question for Brian, and I'm sorry, it is kind of a multi-part question. I apologize. So, I was surprised to hear you say that we haven't really seen an obvious effect on fall colors in recent years, because to my eyes, last fall in the Twin Cities, colors seemed kind of muddy to me. I'm curious if that was because last year we didn't get that ideal combination for the anthocyanins, those brilliant reds, to show up, to your recollection. And then I'm also curious if it's possible that multiple years of drought in a row could end up affecting color, because that's the situation we're in right now.
So, in terms of brilliance of fall colors, I think everybody is going to have kind of their own perspective. Brilliance to me is almost like a subjective term. I'm not aware of any researchers. This could be going on in the country, but I'm not aware of it, where you take like a photograph of the same tree at the same time every year. So there's that. There's also kind of people that are looking at individual trees or trees that are right along a road versus looking at the whole forest. And yeah, I kind of mentioned this when I was talking, that things that stress trees, I mean, they can turn certain trees, particularly those that are already stressed, which tend to be in an urban environment or along the roads, they can turn fall colors really early. But that is almost a separate phenomenon as the bulk of the landscape turning fall colors. It's almost like two separate events. And so it's really tough to determine how brilliant fall colors are. Just from my perspective, as one person in Minnesota, they're pretty good every year. Now, in terms of the second part, you were asked about the impact of successive droughts, kind of on tree health and fall colors. And certainly, the more droughts we get in a row, the greater the stress on trees. When a given tree is severely drought stressed, what it does in the summer is it drops a lot of its leaves, and a lot of its leaves turn brown. So a really severe drought will delay the onset of the bulk of fall colors. And some scientists say it will enhance fall colors. So when we're talking about drought and its impact on fall colors, the waters are very muddy. It's a very complicated process, and I don't feel like anyone truly has a firm grasp on it. I know in 2016 there were severe droughts out in the northeast part of the country and in the southeast part of the country. Scientists back then were talking about how if the spring and summer was 30 to 70% of normal, they were considering that a moderate drought. And they predicted that those fall colors would be delayed. So that's, Kenny, it'd be interesting to get your perspective on the descriptive word for a drought that's 30 to 70% of normal. This is another problem where people who describe drought use imprecise words like moderate and severe and exceptional. Everyone's moderate, it seems to be different.
Kenny, do you
think,
have anything to go ahead?
yeah, sure. I'll just add, Brian, I'm glad you addressed kind of some of the differences, and I just wanted to make sure that folks understand that the U.S. Drought Monitor, which releases these maps every week, these are, for the most part, based on hydroclimatic considerations. So essentially metrics that are based on how much precipitation has fallen relative to what is needed. And there's a few different ways of establishing that over some period of time. And then there are additional considerations that the Drought Monitor authors will make based on things that are observed on the landscape. But it should be obvious, but it's worth probably mentioning that what shows up as extreme or exceptional or even severe, severe, extreme, or exceptional on the U.S. Drought Monitor that might make perfect sense from a hydroclimatic standpoint and might be something that all people can agree on, but it might not reflect what you see in other natural systems, and it might not tell the story of stresses on things like trees and other types of plants. So, one of the things that we learned in looking at the literature of how the changing climate is affecting other parts of the natural world, we saw that even at a time when Minnesota's climate grew much wetter, there were signs of drought stress showing up in our forests in northeastern Minnesota. I want to say that the term that was used was hydrothermal deficit. And so because the temperatures were changing and increasing faster than the precipitation was able to keep up with, even though there was actually more precipitation than there had been historically, it was still pushing these trees into drought-like responses and was causing things like premature mortality. So climatologically, we might not even have said that there was increasing drought in the area, but if you had done a survey of the trees, you would have gotten a very different story. So just keep in mind, these are in a way, these are apples to oranges comparisons when we're talking about what do the what does temperature and precipitation specifically tell us about what the climate is doing versus what are the trees telling us.
Thank you, Kenny. Jake has his hand up. Jake, go ahead and ask your question.
So I've got two questions. First is, it was mentioned that it's less about tree genetics and more about length of day and temperature. So how does the shorter days as we go on through the year, that's not necessarily going to change, but we have these longer summer temps. How is that interplay going to result in the tree colors as summer temperatures continue to progress into fall territory? How is that going to change? And then my second question is the smoke that we're receiving from Canada. How is that possibly playing into the colors of the trees and the way that the trees might feel that they are receiving their sunlight?
Well, let's talk about the smoke first. Smoke would diminish the amount of sunlight that trees are receiving. I'm not sure if it would reduce that sunlight in a significant way. Again, this relates to how many red and pink pigments that a tree produces in the fall. Those pigments are produced more abundantly with more sunny weather and cool nights. And so if we were to get a weather event that would bring in a tremendous amount of smoke and in the early fall, and that smoke would be in the atmosphere for a number of days, perhaps it would diminish the quantity of reds in the landscape. But I think a much larger factor would be if we had, for example, a week and a half of really overcast rainy weather. That's going to have a much more dramatic effect on the quantity of reds, in that they would be lower. In terms of a warming fall, that is going to subtly delay the beginning of the bulk of fall color change. And also, it would reduce the duration of colored leaves on the trees, because higher temperatures increase the physiological process of fall leaf color change. And it also would diminish the brilliance of fall colors, because those red pigments rely on cool nights. So if you're getting warm nights, you aren't going to have as many red and pink pigments produced. Now, the question is, though, is this going to be something significant that everyone is going to clearly notice? Only time will tell.
Thanks, Brian. Are there any other questions?
Can you just on a baseline level talk about what the fall colors look like right now? I know that there's not a lot to talk about, but just kind of the beginnings that we're starting to see in Minnesota.
This is an all-day live alert.